sort of backing away from some of the people that were involved, especially Ed Decker and some of those groups. Because even before I turned 30 years of age, as a young man, I already had a strong commitment to accurately representing the Mormon religion. Now, I've said more than once, and I'll back it up, Islam is closer to biblical Christianity than Mormonism ever could be. Ever could be. For the simple reason, and I'll be dialoguing with Alma Allred about this up in Salt Lake City, but the most fundamental element of a religious belief is whether you are a monotheist who believes there is one true and eternal God who's the creator of all things, or whether you don't believe that. I mean, that really is the most, I guess the only more fundamental dividing line is between whether you're a theist or an atheist. And on that level, Mormonism is the most polytheistic religion that I know. And there's an unlimited, infinite number of gods, at least in classical, historic LDS theology. Mormonism is changing radically. So who knows which group we'll eventually be talking about, because I see splits coming big time. Anyway, then there was, what was the name of that letter? Was it the Martin Harris letter? Was that what it was called? Remember the forger? The Salamander letter. Yeah, the Salamander letter. And everybody was jumping all over the Salamander letter. And Gerald and Sandra Tanner weren't. They had some issues. They were wise. And we likewise just stayed away from it. They were just something, it didn't smell right. Something just didn't look right. But, oh man, a lot of other people, especially again, sort of the ex-Mormon groups, were jumping all over the Salamander letter and using it to demonstrate this about Mormonism and that about Mormonism. And for a long, long time, we have, and it's not like, I didn't do an apprenticeship with some apologetics ministry. I didn't. I am so thankful. I've always been a churchman. I've always been involved in teaching the Christian faith, not just dealing with apologetics. I've always had a high reverence for the church and the primacy of those things, and that definitely puts me in a small group amongst apologists, because a lot of apologists go from church to church, and I can think of one apologist who, basically I don't think has been in the same church for more than 2 years without splitting it, and that says lots of things. Anyway, because of that, I wasn't taught to do this. I didn't read a book somewhere that said these are the standards you should have as a Christian apologist and so on and so forth. But I've just always been absolutely convicted that I can't utilize an argument against a group that could then be turned around and properly used against me. For example, a lot of the older anti-Mormon literature would attack the Book of Mormon. And I'd read this stuff and I'd go, but when we deal, because one of the good things was I didn't just deal with Mormonism. At first, that was the first thing, but I very quickly ran into atheists and Jehovah's Witnesses, and I realized, man, I can't use these arguments because I know the atheists over here argue that in the Old Testament, there is a problem with this and a problem with that, and we have to explain this way. And I look at this statement about the Book of Mormon, and I would have to be using different standards here. I could see a way where fairly the Mormon could say, you're being unfair here. So, for example, when I wrote Letters to a Mormon Elder, and I don't have the old edition here, unfortunately. I was going to tell you the story about that. But when I wrote Letters to a Mormon Elder, if you look at the section on the false prophecies of Joseph Smith, I only list a few. A lot of the information back then would have this long, long list, and I had learned long ago, you focus in upon the ones you can really nail down and prove, because once you start trying to expand just the number of arguments and start giving weaker examples, what will happen is somebody will focus in on the weak example and give a probable explanation of the weak one and then dismiss everything else on the basis of that one weak one. So you don't do that. You give the best ones that you can absolutely nail down, and you stick with that. And that's what I did in Letters to a Mormon Elder. And especially in dealing with false prophecy stuff, I have to deal with allegations of false prophecies in the Bible all the time. And so I can't use one standard in defending the Bible and another in attacking the Book of Mormon. And even back then, there were people going, well, but they're Mormons. Yeah, so? Well, they follow a false god. Yeah, so? Well, then why should you worry about that? Because I followed Jesus, and he's the way, the truth, and the life, and so I have to be truthful even when talking to people who are in error. And it just always has seemed to me so basic and so foundational. And yet, for a lot of Christians, the fact that the person you're talking to is in error somehow almost dehumanizes them. And that's why I really liked about the section I read from the Institutes on yesterday on the program was, here you've got Calvin, and Calvin could go after somebody, man. I read some of the books. He could go after you. But of course, back then, we read Luther and Erasmus and go, wow, intemperate language. And there was. But it was a different day on a number of levels. And people grew up back then. And they didn't wear their feelings on their shoulders. And people could go at each other fork and tongue and then shake hands and go eat dinner at the pub. And it didn't mean that what they were arguing about was any less important to them. It's just, I don't know, I could theorize that it's because they saw so much death and were focused upon eternal things that it created a level of maturity that most of us don't have even to this day, in our day. I could expand upon that